All right, everyone, we have happy news today, which is that Carterpage has decided to sue the FBI and the Department of Justice for illegally surveilling him, pertinent to the investigations, the witch hunts that were going on years ago. He's a former Trump aide, and it's to the tune of $75 million. Honestly, I think you should tack another zero on that. You know, there's going to be a settlement, obviously. It's not going to proceed fully. The government will say, okay, it'll cut its losses and hand him like $10 million and ask him to please not talk about it too much. Please don't write too many books on the subject of how your Fourth Amendment rights were ostensibly violated by the illegal surveillance that was done in a blanket campaign against the Trump admin. And it's pertinent to the witch hunts that were going on for over a year that related to the Steele dossier, which has been completely discredited. The Steele dossier is a pile of steaming horse shit. That involves, and lame streamers, normies still don't know this, basically what Steele did, and Steele's not even an American, he's from UK's intel, he would submit tips to news sites like Yahoo, then he would take the news stories where he was the anonymous source and then wrap them up in his report. This was improperly fed through mid-level FBI agents all the way up to the FISA court, where it was rubber stamped by Rosenstein, because that's his job as a rubber stamper in his former position. Basically, the FISA process, though, is what should be sued. This is part of it. His Fourth Amendment rights were violated. His right to privacy was fundamentally violated by the U.S. government, pertinent to an investigation that never ought to have occurred in the first place. The bigger story, though, is the FISA process itself. Regardless of what admin you have, who's in charge at the FBI, who's in charge of actually looking over the FISA warrants and saying yay or nay, in his role at the time, Rosenstein's as deputy AG. Regardless of what's to be investigated, the FISA process in and of itself should be seen as unconstitutional. The fact that the government has set up an judiciary body to issue blanket warrants in some cases without any particular purview at all is deeply disturbing. It's sort of like when the government, with the NSA, was conducting blanket surveillance on the entire population. Now, we did away with that. I'm sure it's been quietly reinstituted on some level behind the scenes, but the more public program, as far as the NSA's metadata collection, is gone now. It's gone because it's unlawful. It was also useless. The FISA court is also useless. The idea that the government should be able to sign its own warrants without going before any sort of judicial process that requires public scrutiny, I think, is disturbing. The idea, well, we have to. We have to do this because the material is classified, the subject is potentially involved with international terrorism or something, so we need this to be quiet. If it's a U.S. citizen involved, and in the case of Carterpage, the allegation didn't relate to terrorism or cartel activity or anything, it related to the idea that the Russians were in with the Trump camp. It should never have happened. Carterpage never should have had his material swept up. By the way, this opens the potential, depending on what the decision is, and I have a feeling he'll win this case, at least win a sizable settlement. It potentially, and this is one reason the government would rather settle, if he wins the case outright, regardless of whether he gets the $75 million or not, just by winning the case, it sets a precedent for other people to potentially do the same. What if Trump, either in the coming months or 4 years later, depending on what happens, what if he decides to sue? Well, they conducted surveillance on him, they conducted surveillance on his family, they conducted surveillance on a bunch of other people. Flynn could sue. Manafort could sue. Manafort could say, well, you've got this precedent that the investigations that occurred initially were already unlawful. If the only evidence that put me in prison was illegally obtained, he shouldn't be in jail, right? That's the only argument, by the way, that Manafort could make. He did break the law. But they never should have known that he broke the law, because the only reason they were investigating him and knew that he had done something wrong is because of an investigation that in and of itself was unlawful. And this is a possibility. This happens on lower levels all the time. You get a case, for example, someone is dealing a little crack from their home. But the only reason that the police knew that they were dealing crack is because they illegally entered the home without a warrant. Or they entrapped a person, and therefore the fact that they were trying to engage in a sexual crime gets thrown out. We saw this with Chris Hansen's program many years ago. Remember To Catch a Predator? Most of those dudes walked, and hopefully never reoffended. But they walked. They may have been charged, but they were never convicted, because the idea was that the police were cooperating with them, and it was entrapment. because the police were involved. This was successfully argued by most of the people that were perpetrating attempted crimes there during the duration of that program. We see this often with drug dealing. We see this often with cybercrime, that entrapment laws and similar things come into play. Carterpage should never have been under surveillance because there was never probable cause for the investigation itself to exist. I have a feeling that he'll win. The government will probably settle, and they'll probably settle to avoid a legal precedent. They'll just throw him his money. They'll probably settle out for close to the $75 million. They say, okay, but please, just drop the case. If he's smart, he won't. If he's smart, he'll crowdfund the case, and then he'll go all the way to the top echelon of the judiciary and attack the FISA process altogether. That's about all. Peace out.